everybody, with another episode of History Vice video blog. Today I'm going to talk about Russian history today, and I've talked about Russian history in the past a little bit about the old leaders and everything like that. But today I kind of want to talk about why I personally study Russian history, and I just want to share my thoughts on why I feel it's somewhat of rewarding, or at least an exciting field. It's definitely very active. There are lots of scholars and historians who study Russia and Eastern Europe, but I would like to share my personal thoughts on it. The first point I wish to make, it's kind of a meaty one, and definitely you could really study this in its own right. When I look at Russian history, a lot of times I see a common theme of East and West. We have the Eastern world, so to speak, and the so-called Western world. And in addition to Russia, actually, I also enjoy studying the Balkans, ancient Persia, and Ottoman Turkey, which are kind of other areas that are sort of in between, if you will. If we're going to use this East and West paradigm, I would consider those both Russia and Balkans and Ottoman Turkey sort of close to the dividing line, or on the dividing line, or very close to it. And Southeast Asia and China and Japan, they, of course, they have had many. They're in the so-called Eastern world, and they have had many interactions with the Western world, of course. But Russia is interesting because, in a sense, they straddle both worlds, and we'll talk a little bit about that straddling, or being in both worlds, so to speak. And Russia has a perhaps more direct influence in the West, since Russia is very close to Western Europe. As important as Pacific Asia was to Western history, Russia was there on the scene, so to speak. And of course, there are many examples of interactions between Russia and the West. If you look at Alexander Nevsky fighting the Teutonic Knights and the Swedes, you have Peter the Great's efforts, monumental efforts really, to reform Russia and to make it more like a Western state. And there's also, of course, the Russian Civil War, in which Western countries like America and Canada actually intervened to try and oust the communists, which had recently come to power. And now this is more in the realm of the news, but we have the current crisis in Ukraine, where the West has imposed sanctions on Russia for its supposed role in that crisis, and Russia countered sanctions and everything like that. So again, that's part of the news, but eventually that is part of Russia's history. So this cultural Easternness, if you want to use that term, it arguably began in the era of Kievan Rus. It's actually interesting to note that Kievan Rus's first dynasty, the Rurikid dynasty, was supposedly founded by Rurik, a Swedish or Western Viking. That's a very interesting point, I find. But in any case, in 988, the pagan Grand Prince Vladimir, who eventually became Saint Vladimir, he adopted Christianity from the Byzantine Empire. Now, the Great Schism between the Western and the Eastern churches, or Orthodox and Catholicism, didn't happen for about another 70 years or so. But in becoming Eastern Christians, Kievan Rus and its successors, if we may say, like Russia, Ukraine, distinguished themselves in a way from their Western Christian counterparts. Eastern Christianity, as they say, Orthodoxy, and Western Christianity, Catholicism, and eventually Protestantism, they share basic beliefs in God, Christ, sin, redemption, and so on, but there are also drastic differences in other aspects of doctrine and practice. So if you will, Russia kind of went on a different course, culturally and religiously, of course, from the West. And also, when we're talking about East and West, and Russia's role in that, there's definitely a sense of otherness. And what I mean by otherness, if a person from culture A looks at a person from culture B, A and B will kind of, well, I'll use the term, I'm not sure if it's a word, but otherize each other, if that makes sense. They will say, a person in group A will be saying about group B, oh, they're not us. And so there might be even a sense of, perhaps a sense of superiority, or at least a sense of, you know, we're not them, they're not us. Extreme forms of otherness would be, I would say, Edward Said's idea of Orientalism, where the East is kind of looked upon with contempt, and kind of like the West has to come in and colonize and teach these Easterners a lesson, not necessarily wipe them out, but, you know, we need to impose our views on them. And so I've seen a little bit of this practice of otherness when talking about Russia. Russians become, at least here in the Western world, and it's probably the same the other way, where Russians almost develop a sense they're part of the other. And clips like these are really prevalent on YouTube, along with some kind of label such as "We Love Russia." With a lot of those clips, there's maybe a comment about Russians are really different, even though there are lots of accidents that happen in the Western world as well. You know, car accidents are certainly not unique to Russia. Now, mind you, there are lots of clips from Russia that would be funny no matter where they were filmed. And this debate, if you will, over East and West and otherness and so on, not exactly a new issue. The Russians, in fact, had a big debate about this in the 19th century between the Westernizers and the Slavophiles. And this debate sparked in 1836. This was when Peter Chadayev sent an explosive letter to a journal. And in it, he suggested, in French, it was a French letter, that he suggested that Russia was a cultural non-entity. He believed in Russia's potential as a power, as a country, but he said that the country was stuck between Europe and Asia. Kind of like what I was saying about Russia straddles both East and West. And Chadayev said that despite this, it was sort of in between, it adopted nothing of cultural significance or value from either Europe or Asia. And so it didn't really bring a culture of any significance to the rest of the world. Then the Slavophiles appeared on the scene, countering Chadayev's argument. Based in Moscow, these scholars said that Russia was culturally significant and had a lot to offer the world. The Slavophiles otherized Western culture. In their minds, Western culture was corrupted, partly because the Pope had compromised religion for the sake of secular power. The Western culture had seduced Chadayev and the so-called Westernizers. The Westernizers saw Russia simply as a European country. Vissarion Belinsky, for example, said that Russia was European because it was geographically close to Europe, and unlike Asian nations, such as China and Japan and India, Russia was Christian. Westernizers respected Peter the Great for his great reforms, as they believed Russia could adopt Western ideas and make their governments and the society better, and become greater because they adopted these Western ideas, and yet they could still maintain a unique Russian essence. And so all of these points, this debate between Slavophiles and Westernizers, this otherness, this kind of East and West kind of interaction, it creates huge opportunities for scholars for great comparative studies between Russia and the Western world. I suppose a second reason why I like studying Russian history is the fact that I'm actually studying the Russian language right now. Или по-русски, я изучаю русский язык. Мне иногда трудно, но когда я читаю русскую статью об истории, мне весело. And the third reason, and third and final reason why Russia is, I find Russian history a fascinating area of study, is just the sheer amount of things that can be studied. Now, any country will be like this. You know, Canada, UK, France, China, and all those countries and all others, they can have a deep national history with a lot to study in there. But Russia is also a huge country. It's the largest country in the world, and it has a history going back more than 1,000 years. If you include, like many historians do, Kievan Rus as part of the Russian historical narrative. The other thing is, Russian history is not short of controversies. We talked a little bit earlier about Westernizers and Slavophiles. And another thing about Kievan Rus is, you know, it certainly created debate. Like, as I say, Russian history is said to start then. And certainly that's true, but it creates a problem if we say that Kievan Rus is Russian history only. But remember, the area of the Kievan Rus principalities, Kiev. Kiev is in Ukraine. If we say that Kievan Rus is only Russian, then kind of create a problem. You know, then what about the Ukrainian role? What about the Belarusian role? Because Kievan Rus went into Belarus as well, modern Belarus as well. We also have the Crimean situation, political turmoil over that, and also the current situation in eastern Ukraine, like Donetsk and all that. You know, definitely, if you're looking for controversy in Russian history, you'll find it eventually. There's also a deep intellectual history in Russia as well. What was called the Remarkable Decade was 1838 to 1848. Isaiah Berlin saw this time as the beginnings of the Russian Intelligentsia, and he suggested that these scholars' ideas would set the moral tone throughout the 19th and early 20th century up to the final climax of 1917, which he's talking about the Communist Revolution. And if you're a military historian, you can look at the Mongol invasion of Kievan Rus, and Rus's ultimate destruction by the Mongols, and the occupation of Rus, which is so-called the Appanage period, and the Russian resistance to it, and the campaigns against the successors of the Mongols. You have problems with the Crimean Khanate, when the Russians had to try to build fortifications to prevent the Khanates prevent the Crimean Khanate from raiding into Russian territory. And of course, you have World War II, which was pretty much an epic struggle for survival against Western German forces. And also, I guess this is the final point actually, Russia has a big role in the world. Of course, we look at World War II, where much of the fighting in World War II was done between the Nazi Germany and its allies and the Soviet Union. And then afterwards, the Cold War, where Russia shared the world, so to speak, with the United States, the other superpower. So Russia's role in world history has certainly not been minute. And with all these put together, it makes Russian history a very exciting field, in my opinion. And I would like to thank you all for watching this another episode of History Vice video blog. I hope it was informative and enjoyable for you guys. And we will talk to you some other time. Bye-bye.